good morning, everybody, and welcome to Town Hall Europe, the debating centre of Friends of Europe, here in the heart of Brussels. And welcome to our Policy Insight. Normally we do these at the end of the afternoon, but we like to keep everybody on their toes. So this time we're doing it relatively early in the morning. So it's good to see so many of you joining us for the debate today. My name is Shea, and I'm a senior fellow here at Friends of Europe. And again, it will be my pleasure to be your moderator for today's debate. We've chosen the title Frozen Conflicts, Thawing Tensions in the EU's eastern neighbourhood. And of course, we could put a question mark after frozen conflicts, because as we've seen tragically in Ukraine over the last 5 weeks, these conflicts can unfreeze with dramatic consequences very quickly. And a question mark also after thawing tensions, because obviously we are not certain if we are going forwards or backwards in these different conflict situations. And of course, the prospects of going forwards or backwards is very much what is going to be at the heart of the debate today. When we talk about frozen conflicts, we are obviously looking at a number of specific situations. They've been dragging on for years without resolution, and so I think that they are probably already depressingly familiar to you. We've got the situation in Transnistria, in the northern part of Moldova, which has been separated de facto, if not de jure, from the rest of Moldova since the end of the Cold War, where Russia has parked a considerable number of military forces in Transnistria. We, of course, have got the situation in Georgia with the two regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which again have been not under the direct control of the Tbilisi government since the end of the Cold War, and even less under the control of the Tbilisi government since Russia invaded Georgia in 2008 and subsequently has recognized the sovereignty of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, although very few other countries in the world have followed suit. We, of course, are also looking at Nagorno-Karabakh, the disputed region between Armenia and Azerbaijan, where conflict broke out once again in 2020, and Azerbaijan recovered a good deal of its former territory in Nagorno-Karabakh, and we have had since a ceasefire with a monitoring mission led by Russia and Turkey. But as we've seen from some recent shelling or a small eruption of violence again in recent weeks, that is still far from stable. And naturally, we inevitably have got Ukraine very much in the spotlight of the international media, where we've had the annexation, the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia back in 2014, the Russian incursion into the Donbass, and now the speculation that Russia, given its setbacks in the invasion of Ukraine, will refocus its forces to try to seize more territory in Donetsk, in Luhansk, in the general Donbass region. That is certainly a hot conflict, but even what we termed a frozen conflict, which is a complete misnomer because that conflict in the Donbass was far from cold. 14,000 people were killed in the fighting since 2014, and hundreds of thousands have been displaced. Now, the focus on Ukraine has, on the one hand, diverted attention away from what's going on elsewhere in these difficult conflict situations on the periphery of Europe. But it's also, ironically, refocused attention because, of course, everybody is waiting to see what the impact of the fighting in Ukraine could be on Russia's designs elsewhere in the Euro-Atlantic region, and on the prospects for deterrence of further Russian aggression, or the resilience of these countries, many of whom, of course, are partners of NATO, many of whom also are partners of the European Union, and, of course, in the case of Georgia, we have the same NATO commitment that Georgia will be a member of NATO one day that we've also seen applied vis-à-vis Kiev. So the conflicts are different in terms of the humanitarian situation and needs, the degree of militarization and tension, the different possibilities for peace negotiations or resolution, and of course the different actors, both local and international, because, for example, Turkey is a major player in Nagorno-Karabakh. But there are also similarities, the degree of Russian involvement, both as a protagonist and sometimes as a self-proclaimed mediator or peacekeeper. Russia is certainly a key driver of these conflicts. We've got bloc peace processes that have been dragging on for years in Geneva and other parts of Europe, whether you call them Minsk or Geneva or 5+2, clearly there have been lots and lots of meetings, but so far have not produced results. So what should we look for? And I've asked our three speakers today to focus on four key questions. Number one, what would be the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, on these other situations? Could we see a spillover? How would Russia deal with these other conflict situations? Could we expect more violence or less violence if Russia is diverted now in the long run by Ukraine? What are the prospects of helping these countries now before Russia acts further in terms of deterrence, in terms of capacity building, in terms of strengthening their armed forces? What should we be doing? How active should NATO and the EU be? And what would be, in Europe at least, the different roles of NATO, the EU, or individual European countries, or the United States, of course? What are the prospects for peace? When we talk about frozen, are there possibilities of unfreezing, but not unfreezing towards war, unfreezing towards peace? And finally, because we've got two prominent representatives of civil society from the region today, are there prospects for grassroots diplomacy, for civil society initiatives that could help to bring people divided by barriers and barbed wire? Can civil society help to build from the bottom up reconciliation and dialogue? Well, those are four key questions. Fortunately, I don't have to answer them, but we've got three, as I've said, excellent speakers who definitely can. First of all, we've got Željana Zovko, a well-known personality here in Brussels. She's, of course, a member of the European Parliament. She's Vice Chair of the Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee, Vice Chair of the group of the EPP, the European People's Party. So I often see Željana on the TV, so I'm delighted that she's on our screen today. She'll be the first speaker. Then we have from Georgia, Hamida Giyasbayli. Hamida, I hope fervently that I've pronounced your name correctly. Please correct me if I have not done so, who is a prominent human rights activist and journalist. And we have Esmira Jafarova from Azerbaijan, who's a board member of the Center for the Analysis of International Relations in Azerbaijan. So we're going to hear first and foremost from our three speakers. And then I've asked my colleague, a senior fellow here at Friends of Europe, Paul Taylor, to just give us his take on what he has heard and to ask the first question. And that also, final point before I stop and hand over to Željana, means that I'm urging, as I always do, all of you in the audience to be ready, primed for the debate. Don't leave it to the last minute. You have hashtag FOE debate. You have, of course, the Zoom. Those of you who are on Zoom, you have the chat. Multitude of different ways of getting in touch. So please come forward with your questions. And the earlier you put your name up, the more guarantee you have that I will be able to bring you into the debate. So that's it in terms of modus operandi. Now let's get going and hear from our three experts. And first I hand the virtual microphone over to Željana. And so please, Madam Vice Chair, take us away. The floor is yours.
Right, thank you very much, dear Mr. Shea. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to excuse myself because I will not be able to stay with you longer, as I'm going to give you my speech, and we are adopting a very important position paper at this moment, so that's why I'm outside Brussels and I have to join my colleagues. But I would like I would like to thank you for inviting me to this timely conference, and thanks to Friends of Europe for organizing the debate. The world has changed in the short period of time since I received this invitation to join today's discussion and these events. And these events will impact the frozen conflict that we plan to cover in the next hour. As a standing rapporteur in the European Parliament for Azerbaijan, I monitor the situation in Eastern neighbourhood closely, with particular attention to South Caucasus. I have regular contact with the authorities from Azerbaijan and Armenia, who share with me their view on the latest development. The latest Nagorno-Karabakh war in 2020 have brought the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan to a new phase. Since the ceasefire agreement brokered by Russia, regular skirmishes in the border area continue to take place. Last week, even, Russian peacekeepers have accused Azerbaijan from violating the ceasefire agreement by entering the zones that are under Russian supervision. Azerbaijan and Armenia urgently need to start negotiations about the sustainable settlement that includes clear border delimitation and demarcation. As for the other frozen conflicts in the region, the Russian war in Ukraine will directly affect the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh. Firstly, the only organization with the mandate to mediate between the two countries is OSCE Minsk Group, co-chaired by Russia, France, and the US. Now, it is still unclear what the new divide between Russia and the West will mean for this cooperation. Last week, France has indicated that it is ready to support Armenia-Azerbaijan peace talks. Secondly, the EU should avoid that Russia dominate possible future negotiations as they have done in 2020. The latest conflict has led to an increase of Russian and Turkish influence in the South Caucasus. Russian peacekeepers are still active on the ground. Armenia has traditionally close relations with Moscow, and on 22nd February, President Aliyev and President Putin have signed an allied cooperation agreement that outlines the cooperation between two countries. Over the last year, the EU has shown its commitment to peace process. The high-level meeting in December, organized by Council Presidency Michel, and the recent joint phone call of President Michel and President in concrete progress, such as the opening of the communication channels between the two neighboring countries. I would also like to welcome the work of Toivo Klar, who should have also participated today. And I just found out that he is also taken by some other obligation, but hopefully we will have this contribution in the future. And his engagement to reconcile Armenia and Azerbaijan. The EU must be actively involved in South Caucasus. Thirdly, we have to be vigilant and make sure that war in Ukraine does not increase current tensions and in these frozen conflicts. Russia gets isolated more every day. And as we could not predict Putin's action in Ukraine, we cannot predict whether he plans to open some other frozen conflicts, either to divert world's attention or to gain strategic ground in other parts of the region. At the same time, we should avoid that the tensions between Armenia and Azerbaijan don't escalate. While the world's eyes are still looking at the Ukraine, the two countries should refrain from seeking a possible momentum to engage in a new military conflict. Instead, they should find the political courage to work on a sustainable solution that leads to reconciliation and coexistence. And I welcome the engagement of civil society and also inclusion of international bodies such as UNESCO to find out the way to reconcile and to find the path as well to appreciate and respect more the shared heritage that these two communities have in Nagorno-Karabakh. I'm open for your questions, but unfortunately, as I said, I will have to leave in a few moments' time. And I wish you good luck and all the best in today's debate.
Zolana, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, I did forget to mention that unfortunately, Zovko, the EU Special Representative for Nagorno-Karabakh, the Armenia-Azerbaijan relationship, he had to cancel his participation because I think there are some important meetings going on today. So he did have a good pretext, and hopefully we can have him back on a future occasion. But Zolana, thank you for getting us going. And you did point out that the EU is working the issue hard, and there may be some prospects for the OSCE Minsk group to once again play a key role. So hope springs eternal when it comes to the frozen conflicts. Now let's turn to Hamida, please. As I mentioned, human rights activist and journalist. And Zolana mentioned UNESCO, civil society initiatives, programs. So Hamida, give us a sense of what's happening and how effective you see these processes and what more people can do, particularly here in Brussels, to support the kind of work that you're doing yourself. So I'm sending you once more the virtual microphone, and it's already arrived. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear audience, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers for inviting me and providing the age and gender diversity among the speakers, as well as my criticism for the substantial underrepresentation by professionals from across the regions we're going to be talking about today. We're brought here due to the ongoing armed conflict in Ukraine that has already killed and displaced millions of people. This has been a truly destabilizing time for the people of the Eastern Partnership countries, who have on a serious note not known peace for many decades. In this past month, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Moldova have tried to balance the necessity for good relations with Russia with a desire to support Ukrainian territorial integrity. It also had portions of their population openly showing discontent towards the politics of neutrality. Most of the breakaway territories have demonstrated either support to Russia or neutrality as well. Observing from the Caucasus, these policies are undoubtedly driven by terror, panic, and flashbacks of history lived at the beginning of the previous century. Currently, Georgia with its rose and velvet revolutions, Armenia and its reject Serge revolution, and Azerbaijan with no hint of possible democratic change yet, are stuck in a slow reverse with its democratic achievements, while the West is losing its prestige and credibility within the region. We all are in an interlinked time frame where if war in Ukraine will not stop soon, the potential scenarios of destabilization of the Eastern Partnership countries through either Russian expansionism or Western by opening new fronts with Russia and potentially turning it into a nuclear war will be unavoidable. Such institutions of the global north like EU, NATO, OSCE, over time have lost their trust among the population and are being accused of hypocrisy. Now too, as the European weapons exported to Russia after the annexation of Crimea and Donbass are being spotted by journalists on the Ukrainian front line. For a decade, the global societies, as well as EU member states, are witnessing shrinking spaces for civil society. Diplomacy led by civil societies being one of the most effective approaches to building peace has reached an impasse, of not having space in the face of wars led by interests of conservative neoliberal elites. The global rise of right-wing forces have not only impacted the South Caucasus, but European parliaments that hold the highest number of far-right representatives since World War II. The promises made to reduce emissions by 2030, followed by non-stop wars, are slowly becoming utopic. Significant sources of anthropogenic emissions, especially in areas of conflict, are polluting and burning our world down, stealing the future of the young generations. The issues in the Eastern Partnership countries, or the so-called frozen conflicts, are not necessarily the major threat to the European stability. It is the technocratic world order, international arms trade, rising authoritarianism that are threat to the stability of the whole world. Particularly with the global coronavirus pandemic, threat is the loss of essence of what is freedom. Diplomatic efforts must be increased across the globe, not only in the Eastern Partnership countries. The finances that are being spent on militarization, building of physical walls between countries, murder and imprisonment of journalists, activists, and human rights defenders must be redirected into development of global movement of solidarity opposed to the concept of war itself. Study of common meanings of peace and integration of these concepts into our educational system. Thank you very much.
Hamida, thank you very much for that. That was, I must say, a very sobering analysis of the issues. The loss of credibility of the West, of international organizations, that's obviously worrying. Maybe in the debate we could try to understand why you perceive a loss of credibility and what they can do to re-establish credibility. The idea of course, of pursuing contradictory policies, trying on the one hand to contain Russian assertiveness, but on the other hand assisting it, if you say, by supplying weapons. What maybe after Ukraine there will be a more consistent policy towards Russia. Be interesting to get your view on that, Hamida. You also mentioned, of course, the consequences of this long-term separation of these breakaway regions from their sort of home sovereign states, and that also, I suppose, poses the question of if one day hopefully the breakaway regions are reunited with their sovereign home countries. What are the prospects of reintegration, of reconciliation, of living together after so many years of this de facto separation? And you said the way in which many of these regions have sided either voluntarily or involuntarily with Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. And you mentioned, of course, more general issues of what you call the technocratic world order. Lots and lots of substance there, Hamida. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to sort of deal with all of it, but certainly some of those points I think are excellent, and we'll try to come back to you to see what sort of solutions you have in mind. So thank you for broadening our debate there. So our third speaker, as I mentioned, is Esmira Jafarova. I've introduced her already. She is in Azerbaijan. So Esmira, looking forward to your remarks. And so the microphone is already there. So please, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation and this very timely debate. I'm going to focus on some developments in the South Caucasus following the 44-day Karabakh war last year, and also highlight some new developments currently, and as well as from the presence of the events that is happening in Ukraine currently. But before I do that, I just want to make just a little clarification about the ideas that were highlighted before. First of all, Nagorno-Karabakh is not and was never a disputed territory. There are international documents, United Nations Security Council resolutions, with which recognize this region as an integral and inalienable part of Azerbaijan. And therefore, we never actually want to use the word disputed when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as there is no entity within Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh anymore because it was dismissed. Any use of the terminology Nagorno-Karabakh should refer to the historical context, but currently there is only Karabakh Economic Zone in Azerbaijan. That's that. But when it comes to the main point of my intervention, I'd like to cluster them under 5 points, 5 clusters, and highlight them one by one. First of all, I want to talk about the implementation of the November agreement, November 10th or 9th, depending on from which perspective you look, agreement, 2020 agreement that was signed between Russian Federation, Azerbaijan and Armenia that ended the war in Karabakh. As well as the prospects of peace treaty and peace prospects that were also earlier talked about during this debate. This implementation of the November agreement is very, very important. Unfortunately, these skirmishes and periodic violations and this border clashes that we are witnessing currently is the result of the non-implementation, not full implementation of the November agreement on the part of Armenia. Because according to the Article 4 of the November agreement, all the Armenian armed forces, all the remnants of the Armenian armed groups should have left the territories of Azerbaijan together with the deployment of the peacekeeping forces from the Russian Federation to those areas. Unfortunately, what we are witnessing at the moment is that there are still military formations remaining in the Azerbaijani territories, and they are carrying some sabotage activities against Azerbaijan, our territorial integrity. And therefore, we are witnessing these periodic clashes that unfortunately is happening between the two countries. When it comes to a peace treaty, yes, Azerbaijan wants to sign a peace treaty with Armenia, and we have made many appeals to Armenian side that we are ready for it. And just very recently, we made 5 proposals to Armenia on how we would like to move on in terms of signing the peace treaty, and they have not yet really fully responded to that. Well, any responses that they have provided, unfortunately, is not really fully considering the whole essence of the idea that we would like to sign the peace treaty based on the mutual recognition of territorial integrity, sovereignty of both Armenia and Azerbaijan. So there are 5 points to that in the Q&A session. If anyone wants to discuss it in further details, we would like to do that. And second issue is delimitation and demarcation. That was also touched upon previously. Yes, we would like to engage, and we have made a lot of appeals and let's say proposals on how to move forward. And there were also the idea of setting up special commission on working on delimitation and demarcation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But Azerbaijan stresses this many times that we don't want any preconditions. There should not be any preconditions in starting this delimitation and demarcation process. This process should be done based, of course, on the previous Soviet maps. It's not yet decided which map they should be, but this is an important part of the peace agenda, of the peace process. The third issue is the humanitarian issues. Well, Azerbaijan stresses this many times, that we do not have the prisoners of war currently held, because all those prisoners of war potentially we have already returned. And those detainees that were detained in Azerbaijani territories after the November agreements were signed, after the 10th of November agreement, those are not the prisoners of war because the war was over by then. However, despite this, Azerbaijan has still returned some of these detainees, the saboteurs that came passing through the Lachen corridor in order to carry the sabotage terrorist activities against Azerbaijan. We still return them to Armenia in exchange of the landmine maps that we wanted to get from Armenia for a long time. Well, unfortunately, the landmine maps that they have given us are very, very inaccurate, and their accuracy is reported to be about 25%. And trust me, the liberated Azerbaijani territories are very heavily contaminated with landmines. And even for example, in Aghdam, simply in Aghdam, they were reported to be 97,000 of landmines. This is a huge number. And in some areas, Azerbaijani National Agency for Mine Action says that it can take up to 10 years to clean these areas from landmines. So landmines and the maps and Armenia's reluctance to give us the correct maps is a really, really huge issue also for Azerbaijan. And this this is an important issue also to build the confidence building. I'm not sure Armenia is really using this to the maximum extent. The third and the fourth issue is economic communication and opening of all communications, the Zengezur corridor issue. I don't know to what extent you all are familiar with this issue, but Armenia has been, on the first occasion, they were not really happy about this, but then they said that they can go for it because especially it was enshrined in the Article 9 of the November 10th, 2020 agreement. So there were these very mixed messages from Armenian side about whether they want this corridor or they don't want this corridor. They were not happy with the word of corridor, but Azerbaijan's position was that any concessions that Azerbaijan might make on Zengezur corridor, for example, the customs check that Armenia wants to establish in this corridor, this should also be applied in the Lachen corridor, in the regime of the Lachen corridor that is currently providing the link between Armenia and the Karabakh area. And plus, given the reluctance and this inconsistency from Armenian side in regard to the Zengezur corridor, Azerbaijan very recently signed a transportation agreement with Iran, which will unite Western Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan using the northwestern part of Iran. So this agreement actually mirrors potentially the Zengezur corridor. So we are making clear that if Armenia continues to reject or tiptoe around the Zengezur corridor, we can also have alternative options to Zengezur corridor. There's more yet to this. We can discuss it later if there will be more interest. But the idea is that implementation of November 10 agreement is important, and this opening of all economic communication is enshrined in the Article 9 of this particular agreement, and Armenia rejects to implement this as well. And the fifth issue, and I will be brief here, Ukraine and Azerbaijan, how a conflict in Ukraine influences. Well, I'll tell you something. When we watch what is happening in Ukraine, and everyone, of course, and obviously supports the territorial integrity, principle of territorial integrity, and Azerbaijan also supports the principle of territorial integrity, and we have sent on numerous occasions humanitarian aid to Ukraine. But when you look back, the 44-day wars that happened in Karabakh, everyone was against Azerbaijan for some reason, despite the fact that Azerbaijan's territorial integrity is enshrined by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And those Bayraktar drones that are now praised, they were under sanctions during 44-day war. So you tell me whether there is a double standards in international affairs, international law, when it comes to principle of territorial integrity. If we're supporting the principle of territorial integrity, this should be united. It should be all-inclusive and applied to all, and not be selective. So that's that. I'm sorry I spoke.
No, Esmira, thank you. No, that was very interesting. It was rich in detail. Thank you very much. It was a great overview of where things stand. So I'm grateful for that. Just a couple of clarifications from my side. If I mentioned disputed territory, I didn't mean in terms of territorial integrity or sovereignty of Karabakh as being a part of Azerbaijan. I was really simply referring to the fighting, the conflict situation that had gone on. And I understand you like the term Karabakh. If I said Nagorno-Karabakh, it's simply because that is the terminology that's been so prevalent in the international community for the last 30 years or so that most people would recognize the issue under that name, that terminology. But thank you for setting me right, at least, and giving us your perspective. A couple of things that I would like perhaps to ask you, not now, but for the debate, is how about reconstruction in Karabakh, where Azerbaijan is now back in control? Is it a big issue? I mean, you mentioned demining, but the overall sort of economic regeneration and reconstruction, is this something that Azerbaijan has to do largely by itself, or are institutions like the World Bank, the international financial institutions, Turkey supporting you there? The other thing that interests us here is that Turkey and Armenia have started to speak to each other again. Does this have any bearing, do you think, on Armenia's approach to the what you want to call it, dispute, conflict, whatever terminology one uses, but can this be helpful in terms of the overall peace process? So, but that's for the debate. So thank you again, Esmira, Hamida. As Željana has had to leave us because of pressing business at the European Parliament, I'm going to rely on both of you very much to field our debate and discussion. I'm also looking to the audience to be ready soon to come in with your questions. But as I've said before that, I've once again prevailed, and he always says yes, on my senior fellow, Paul Taylor, a former Reuters diplomatic correspondent and now a columnist at Politico, as well as senior fellow here. He always has a good take on issues of Euro-Atlantic security. So, Paul, what's your take on what you've heard so far? And you did promise to ask the first very penetrative questions, as you always do. So please ask your questions as well. So, Paul, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jamie, for that poison chalice. Esmira mentioned minefields, and I really feel I'm tiptoeing into a diplomatic minefield here, talking on a subject where even the nomenclature of the subject is so disputed. You know, some people object to the whole notion of frozen conflicts, saying either in the case of Russia about Crimea that they're not conflicts, and they're not frozen, they've been solved, or in the case of others that they're not frozen because they keep flaring up, and they can flare up at any time, and therefore the notion of frozen conflicts is too reassuring. So I tend to use the term unresolved conflicts, but even that is subject to dispute. The Russians say that the issue of Crimea is resolved. That's not a view shared, obviously, not only by Ukraine, but also by the majority of countries represented in the United Nations. So terminology itself, nomenclature, is important. I think what we heard, interestingly, was this idea of countries keeping their heads down. You know, Hamida really made this point that countries are trying to be, governments are trying to be neutral, and that this is causing discontent among some of their population, who feel, in some cases, a sense of solidarity with the people of Ukraine. And I can understand that. I think my question to Hamida would be, you know, what do you think governments should do of your countries that are facing these unresolved conflicts? How should governments position themselves? What would you rather have them do than sort of staying neutral and trying to stay on side with Russia? I think when I very much understand the idea that when Russia is at war, a war that it has unleashed itself, but nevertheless at war, and in not necessarily particularly good position in that war. If you're a government which has one or more of these unresolved conflicts on your territory, you probably just try to keep your head down and hope that Russia will not try to use the conflict on your territory for additional leverage, or as a way of distracting from their problems on the battlefield in Ukraine, or as a way of increasing the discomfort of the European Union or of other regions. So I don't think those, if I may say so, are issues to do with neoliberalism or the global north versus the global south, or any of that. I actually think those are practical problems that are faced by countries in the region. So my questions would therefore be: firstly, what would you have governments do differently, and what should civil society do differently? But I think my second question, and it's a shame that we've lost Željana, but if there's anybody out there from the European Union institutions, it seems to me that the European Union approach to this region has been to try and at the same time do whatever diplomacy it can and mediation, but also to provide support for civil society, for local economies, and for people-to-people interaction, so as to permit and promote and encourage sort of bottom-up engagement. Now, those, ultimately, the levers are largely in the hands of Russia. If Russia wants to dial these conflicts up, it will do so, and no amount of civil society engagement will prevent that.
Yep.
But so I think the question is, what more would you like to see the European Union doing, and particularly in the long term, as a long-term approach rather than as a crisis management band-aid approach? That would be my other question.
Paul, thank you. Paul, thanks for your comments, particularly on the nomenclatura issues. Absolutely right. But also three good questions, which is what should governments do differently? What can civil society do? And the EU, what would be a longer-term strategy, not simply reactive, not simply jumping from one crisis to another? Hamida and Esmira, I'm going to ask you just to hold your fire for a second, because you've obviously noted those questions from Paul Taylor. I've also got Tengiz and I've got Kerttu, who have also asked to take the floor and ask their questions. So we'll have Tengiz and Kerttu. Then I'll pass the microphone back to you, Hamida and Esmira, to answer. And we've got a couple of questions also then, after this round, from our young participants in Debating Europe, and I'll get to those. But let's first of all have Tengiz. You've put your hand up. I can see you on the screen, so over to you for your question. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I am Tengiz Pkhaladze, Senior Fellow of European Center for International Political Economy. I'm former foreign policy advisor to the President of Georgia. It's my pleasure to be with you, and thank you so much for that discussion. My point is that we have war today in Ukraine because we had so many frozen conflicts before, and in case of every conflict, the main approach was to stop the bloodshed, freeze the conflict, and then we had business as usual with Russia, which just encouraged Russia, to be even more aggressive. So my point is that there is no solution unless we completely change our approach and our attitude, and be focused not to freeze conflict, but for the final solution. And my question is, because we are talking about the civil society engagement, which is, I fully agree, which is extremely important dialogue and the development project of between divided society and so on. But there is the problem that we have big elephant in the room. It's Russia. And my question is that how to convince our partners and how to be coherent and discuss not just particular cases, but elaborate the strategy to stop Russia's aggression towards neighboring countries. Thank you.
Okay, Tengiz. Yes, Paul Taylor mentioned that as well, how to sort of take all of the levers away from Russia and put some of those levers into the hands of the EU, the OSCE, those who are looking to solve the conflict rather than simply twist the knife in the wound. Good question. So thank you for that. Good to see you, Tengiz. Kerttu, please, a quick question from your side too, and then I'll pass the microphone back to our speakers.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. My name is Kerttu Mager. I'm working in Estonian permanent representation to the EU. I'm a co-host delegate. So my question is related to the role of EU. I would very much like to views how can the EU support the sustainable long-term settlement between Armenia and Azerbaijan in your view? What are the concrete steps needed? We know that Charles Michel has been very active in facilitating Armenia and Azerbaijan. I understand that a new meeting between the leaders is coming very shortly, in a couple of days. Also, we have Toivo Klaar, the EU special representative in the region. So how do you assess these steps that already have been taken, and what else is needed? And secondly, I have a question also about the role of Russia, as already highlighted by the previous speaker. So we know that just 2 days ahead of Russian invasion of Ukraine, Azerbaijan and Russia concluded a new agreement conveying also military cooperation. And President Aliyev has noted that this new agreement brings the relations of Russia and Azerbaijan to the level of an alliance. So I'm very interested in the views of speakers. What are the implications of this new agreement on the security situation and on the foreign policy choices of Azerbaijan?
Thanks, Kerttu. Thanks very much. Again, good question. So, dear speakers, back to you. Please, you don't necessarily have to answer every question. Well, obviously, in a sense, pick up those that you feel are particularly directed at you. But hopefully, with the 2 speakers, we will answer all the questions. But I also need, looking at the clock, and I want to bring in Debating Europe to ask you if you could give snappy answers, because then we'll have time for a second round. So, first of all, Hamida, please. Hamida, go ahead.
Sorry, I just figured I'm muted. Thank you very much for all of the questions. I'm not sure I will be able to answer all of them, but let's start with one of the last questions. What should governments do? What should European Union do? And what can it do? As I said before in my speech, the global rise in authoritarianism and shrinking spaces for civil society is a global phenomenon. It's not just happening in the region. And with this, leaving the whole policy making and basically politics to the government is becoming quite a dangerous thing to be involved in, because definitely the policies that have been existing for the past 30 years are not working. The situation is becoming worse and worse. We're back into the war situation and active conflicts, just like it was in the 90s. So we are basically going back. What can be done is providing spaces, real spaces for development of civil societies. Like we were talking about Azerbaijan a lot today. In Azerbaijan, the civil society crackdown that has been going on since 2014 just destroyed the whole civil society. There is basically no independent civil society. So there should be approaches to help society to develop, the civil society to develop and be free. There was also a question, what should the governments of the local governments do, like in the region? And obviously, with my comment, I wasn't saying that we definitely have to all stand up and go fight in Ukraine or make a very, very strong anti-Russian sentiment. We have to condemn it, absolutely. That has to be clear. If not joining the sanctions, at least claiming our independence from Russia, starting from the economic sphere, at least. Because for many years, our countries, the post-Soviet countries that are in Eastern Partnership region, we were sadly disappointed with the way our independence is going, because we're constantly being involved in conflicts. We're not really independent from Russia. Our independence is under threat. So starting the unification over all of the current countries that have been part of the Soviet Union, because we have common history, because we have common problems, could be a very important approach, new way to try to tackle our issues.
Hamida, thank you. Thanks, Hamida, thanks very much for that. Esmira, over to you, please, for your answers. Again, I'd ask you if you wouldn't mind being snappy in responding so that I can bring our young debaters of Europe in at the very end, because they want to ask both of you questions, or at least a question each as well. Esmira, please.
Thank you. I'll try to be snappy, but there are a lot of questions that actually
Indeed.
Yeah.
You could do it. You could do it.
I'll try to be snappy. I can do it. First of all, to your two questions. Reconstruction. Yes, Azerbaijan is fully engaged in reconstruction work. Only an airport in Fizuli was built in 8 months. An international airport in Fizuli, liberated Fizuli, was built in 8 months. And you can imagine how quickly the works are going on. And of course, Azerbaijan is mostly doing it at its own expense. And this year, from the state budget, $1.3 billion was allocated for reconstruction purposes. And of course, there are also Turkish firms that are helping us to do that. And we are also, excuse me?
No, sorry, not for me, Esmira.
We're also looking for other potential investors if they would like to invest. And we're looking for...
Sorry, we lost the sound there. If everybody can, apart from the speaker, please keep yourselves on mute. Be grateful. Can we get the sound back? Sorry, Esmira, we lost the sound suddenly. Somebody.
Okay.
No, your backs. Excuse us for that. Please go ahead.
Okay. I don't know where I was left, but I just spoke that we allocated $1.3 billion US dollars
with the Turkish companies helping out.
Yes. Okay. So, and we're also looking forward others to contribute because it's a huge task to do. That's in a nutshell, but a lot to say about that. The second question, Turkey, Armenia. Yes, we support Turkey-Armenia rapprochement because now we would like to have a peace agenda and develop peace. We want to have a peace treaty with Armenia ourselves. So definitely we support Turkish-Armenian rapprochement, and we believe that if there will be closer interaction, and they are already meeting and talking their differences, so we support that process. The third issue, EU role. I believe that despite the fact that EU was really inconsistent in terms of its policy when it comes to Azerbaijan, when it comes to South Caucasus, conflict resolution overall these years, after the 44-day Karabakh war, EU started to play relatively constructive role, and we applaud that. And we have also seen the meetings between the leaders of Azerbaijan with the facilitation of Charles Michel, and there will be another meeting, as someone else, as a previous speaker said, on 6th of April, the next meeting. And I truly believe that EU has the potential to support the post-conflict rehabilitation process, as well as to support the peace agenda in the region. It can actually play a constructive role from now on. Again, a lot to say on that, but I'll try to be brief. And next question about, what was the next question? Russia's role. Well, you know that the ceasefire and the November agreement was mediated by Russian Federation, and Turkey also is playing a part in the monitoring of the peacekeeping forces. The Turkey and Russia, they are not interacting all together in order to provide the implementation of the November agreement. And the thing is, we have recently, last year, signed a Shusha declaration with Turkey, which actually defines our relations, brings our relations to the next level. Now we are allies, and this Shusha declaration has been ratified by both parliaments in Turkey and Azerbaijan, which also implies the military aid in case if one of the parties is subjected to foreign attack. The thing that Azerbaijan signed the agreement on allied interaction. Remember, this is not an agreement of allies. Allied interaction with Russian Federation a couple of days before the invasion started. It was defined as a coincidence by President Ilham Aliyev during his visit, because the agreement was prepared for a year before that, and the fact that it was signed on that particular date was coincidence. And the fact that Azerbaijan is now working with both Russia and Turkey and is trying to keep its balanced and neutral position actually explains why Azerbaijan would like to have this kind of agreement with Russia as well. Again, more to that. But there is another question that I received over Twitter. I don't know if I can answer.
No, sorry, Esmira, I do apologise. Maybe you'll have to do that offline. I wish we had more time, particularly as you obviously know this issue so well and are giving out so much useful information. But unfortunately, we don't have more time, and I want you both of you to stay for just a few seconds more, because, as I say, we do have our 2 questions from Debating Europe. So I'll give 1 question to each of you, and that way we'll be able to wrap up on time. So first, the question from Jules, please. Let's have it immediately.
I'm thinking namely of the EU monitoring mission in Georgia, and to which extent will it remain in duty if the Russian troops goes beyond Abkhazia and South Ossetia? I mean, what is the ability of this entity to operate in terms of if the conflict escalates further?
Okay, Jules, thanks. That was about Georgia, Hamida, so it suggests that you should be the one to answer that question, please. And Esmira, I'll ask you to answer in a moment the second question. But Hamida, can I have your answer to that one, please, about the monitoring mission, EU monitoring mission in Abkhazia and South Ossetia?
Sure. First, I would like to say I'm originally from Azerbaijan. I'm not really from Georgia. That's why I've been criticizing the organizers for not providing the representation.
We're big enough to take your criticism. That's on board. But I'm sure you can answer the question nonetheless.
Coming back to the question, we have been saying for many years now that the monitoring missions are being criticized by the local population in Georgia and by politicians and by civil society due to its ineffectiveness. Since I forgot the name of the person who asked the question, but he is right.
Jules, yeah.
Jules, yes, he is right. Russian troops are moving slowly, step by step, more into the territory of Georgia. And so there was also a question to me, why the loss of credibility of Europe in European institutions in the Caucasus, and especially in Georgia. It is specifically because the failure of these kind of missions. It is the failure of the tries to broker peace agreements between opposition and the government during the Georgian political crisis. Yeah. It is the not receiving the expected support during the war in 2008.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. That was a clear answer and with a strong opinion, which is what we like here at Friends of Europe. And so final question, Esmira, to you, and it comes from Mariami, so just be patient a second while we put it up on the screen.
And wanted to know on what spectrum do we consider Abkhazia and South Ossetia as frozen conflict when we witness creeping borders, abductions, disappearances, and so on, and how it is still considered as frozen conflict when there is violation of fundamental human rights every day taking place there.
So again, that was a question on Georgia, Esmira, but you know a lot about the region in general, and it is an interesting question about to what extent, you know, even when there's no fighting, bad things are still happening on the ground, and how we keep, I suppose, the international spotlight on those sort of human rights abuses and violations and so on. What's your take on that?
Well, thank you. Yes, it's a question about Georgia, but I can answer in principle. And I truly agree and completely agree with what you said in the beginning, that there is no idea of a frozen conflict. Yeah. Not a single frozen conflict is indeed a frozen. We can call them unresolved conflicts, whatever, but they're not frozen. And as I said also in my intervention later on, the universal principle of support for territorial integrity and sovereignty of one state should not be selective. If we are supporting this principle, which is the cornerstone and the milestone of the current international world order, we should support it equally, and this right should be universal and not selective. And at the same I can say about the conflict in Georgia. So territorial integrity, support for sovereignty of states, this right should be universal and apply to all 3 states in South Caucasus as well, including Azerbaijan, all over the world as well.
Thanks, Esmira. Thank you for, again, a very short, very crisp and clear answer. Hamida, Esmira, thank you very much for wrapping up for us today. We only had an hour, ladies and gentlemen, but it was a very intense hour. There was a great deal of information. We called this Policy Insight, and I think you'll agree that we had lots of good insights. My understanding, at least, of these issues is greater than it was 1 hour ago, and I'm sure it's the same for many of you. My take as moderator, very briefly, obviously nomenclatura, the way in which we describe and call these things matters, because if we don't get the language right, we don't get the reality right. The idea that different people have different views of when these conflicts are resolved to their satisfaction, but not necessarily to our satisfaction. That is an issue, so we have to be clear about the concepts and the benchmarks that we're working towards. Russia is a key actor, incontournable, as they would say here, but how do we take away some of the levers from Russia and put them into our own hands? Peace agreements, where they do exist, and Esmira was very eloquent on that, we need to make sure that they are implemented, and I think a lesson for Ukraine is that when there is an agreement, let's make sure that the fine print is sufficiently detailed, because we've seen before that vagueness allows different interpretations, and therefore the agreements are never implemented and the conflicts never end. So being clear what we mean in terms of implementation. How do we go from short-term crisis management to long-term strategy building? How do we, if we can't go forwards, at least stop going backwards? The role of the EU, the various instruments, are they being well used in coordination with the OSCE and other actors? Given the horrors of Ukraine, how do we build deterrence, resilience, promotion of civil society, promotion of democratic values, both within the breakaway areas and within their mother countries, if I can use that terminology, at least personally for now. That's going to be important, getting that right. And finally, thinking already now about the reintegration, reconstruction, reconciliation, because without those 4 big R's, the job is never accomplished. So again, thank you to our speakers. Željana, who was with us earlier, had to go. I'm grateful for Hamida and Esmira for carrying us through so magnificently and interestingly. I'm grateful, as always, to Paul Taylor for always having some interesting observations and asking great opening questions. Thanks, Paul. And I'm grateful to you, dear members of the audience, for being with us this relatively early hour, at least for Brussels. Hopefully you found the investment of your time worthwhile. Look forward to seeing you back very shortly on another Policy Insight Friends of Europe event. Keep your eyes on the website for the calendar. And as always, thank you to my collaborators and the team here at Friends of Europe for doing all of the hard work, which I don't have to do, to make this event happen. So that's it for now. So from Town Hall Europe, goodbye, have a good day. See you again, either in person or on the screen before too long.